From the farthest corner of a distant galaxy and the deepest feelings of the human soul comes a fantasy to fill your heart.
I feel tremendous. I'm ready to take on the world. Ow! Ow!
It is everything you've dreamed of. It is nothing you expect.
Oh, I can keep a secret. I won't tell anybody.
It's hard to know who to trust.
It is the mystery of an awesome secret. It is the miracle of everlasting life.
We'll never be sick. We won't get any older, and we won't ever die.
Beyond the innocence of youth and the wisdom of age lies the wonder of Cocoon. 20th Century Fox presents the new film from the producers of Jaws and the director of Splash, Cocoon.
Bem-vindos a mais uma sessão do Mês da Ciência e da Educação, uma iniciativa da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, comissariada pelo professor Carlos Filhais e pelo Dr. David Marçal. As imagens com que começamos são do filme Cocoon, que fala da eterna juventude e da imortalidade. O tema que escolhemos para hoje é o envelhecimento. Por que é que envelhecemos? Qual é o impacto da genética, mas também do stress no processo de envelhecimento? Está comigo em estúdio Elsa Logarinho, investigadora no Instituto de Biologia Molecular e Celular e no Instituto de Investigação e Inovação em Saúde, que é especialista em genética do envelhecimento. E para a conversa convidamos Elissa Epel. É professora de Psiquiatria na Universidade da Califórnia, em São Francisco, onde dirige o Centro de Envelhecimento, Metabolismo e Emoções, Aging, Metabolism and Emotions Center. É membro da Academia Nacional de Medicina dos Estados Unidos e na sua investigação foca-se no impacto do stress crónico no processo biológico do envelhecimento. Professor Elissa Epel joins us from San Francisco. Hello, Professor. Thanks for joining us. I was telling our audience that your research focus has been the impact of chronic stress in biological aging. Particularly, you studied the implications of telomeres, of our chromosomes, in human health and in our happiness. We are happy to have you with us, but better than me, please, can you please tell us what are you really researching and share with us some of your conclusions so far?
Okay, wonderful. I'm so happy to be here with all of you and with your audience. And Spain has been a real leader in aging research. And so it's an honor to share some of the work that we've done over the last almost 20 years with you. I have been studying how stress affects aging in both ways. Stress can accelerate aging and stress can slow down aging. So I'd like to give you a short overview of some of the research before we have our discussion. So I'm going to show some slides. I am a health psychologist. I am a behavioral scientist. So I have been focusing on the things that we do every day, lifestyle, and how we can unleash natural health from ourselves. And of course, we want a pill. We really do. We would love a pill to slow our aging. And today we do not have one. Although the work of Elsa Logarinho and colleagues, we have a lot of hope that there will be some drugs to slow and delay our aging. But since we don't have any right now, we should pay a lot of attention to our own behavior and what we control about our aging. So let me show you some slides. A very common attitude is that everyone wants to live a long life, but no one wants to get old. Being old means being sick, suffering, pain, disability, poor memory. We have a lot of negative ideas about being old, but actually these are myths. And we are seeing people live longer health spans. And that's what we want to focus on, not how long you live, but how long you live well. So for example, Here you see Jane and Mary both lived to 80 years old. They had the same longevity, the same lifespan, but a very different health span. And health span is what we care about. Health span is what matters. Jane lived until 60 years old with health. And then she developed several chronic diseases that caused a lot of discomfort, pain, and suffering. For 20 years, she lived in a disease span. She lived with poor health. Whereas Mary lived all the way up to 79 years old with great health. And so she had a very short disease span. So we want to think about, how can we extend our health span? How can we extend the years of healthy living? So it's not so much related to age, because biological age is more elastic. It's more malleable. We cannot change what's on the clock, but we can change what's in our cells. There are many factors that have been studied about aging, and some of the things that we can control are listed here. So things that speed up aging include negative stereotypes, these beliefs that when we get old, when we hit, let's say 70, we shouldn't go be as active. We may have develop dementia, and just these negative beliefs of all of the bad things that can happen with age. When we hold those beliefs very tightly and we think aging is bad, we are more likely to manifest poor aging, faster aging, earlier disease span. Poor daily habits, of course, drive biological aging. Being sedentary and eating American or Western diet of processed food. Loneliness is a very big predictor of longevity as much as smoking is. Feeling low purpose in life is another predictor of shorter life. And I will focus on the last one, stress, toxic stress. The type of stress that we cannot control that goes on and on for years is what we call toxic stress. And particularly when this happens early in life, when children do not have a lot of resources to cope with stress, this leaves an imprint on their biological aging. I measure how the cells age. And so we see, for example, that early trauma is associated with accelerated aging in the cells when people are adults. And the opposite of fast aging, optimal or slower aging, is related to, of course, the opposite habits. Positive views of aging. So think of someone in your mind who is older and who is living an exemplary lifestyle, one that you admire. And that's what you want to visualize for yourself. Daily habits of being active, eating a whole food diet, being socially connected, feeling purpose when you wake up in the morning. And then this idea of stress resilience. What is stress resilience? I will talk more about this. So what regulates the speed of aging? Well, of course, the clock, to some extent. Age, chronological age, is one of the biggest predictors of disease onset, period. It's huge. But within that, there's a lot of variability, a lot of flexibility. So we all know people who look younger than their age, or maybe they age in dog years, like 6 years to 1. So aging biology is what we really want to focus on, that really regulates the rate of aging and whether we can have a long health span. Stress, chronic toxic stress, can speed up aging because the biology of stress is knocking on all the doors of the aging machinery and wearing it out. So we are exposed to daily stress in many forms. So I'd like you to think about the ways that you wake up and go through your day and where the hot spots are. What are times during your day when you are feeling stress? And let me tell you, we study this in a daily basis. We have people fill out daily diaries, and we can see where and when they become most stressed each day. Having a smartphone is a blessing and a curse, because now we have news, and often it's bad news anytime we look down at our phone, and many of us are addicted to our phones. So this is also a way of information overload, this kind of cognitive load, we call it. Many people report commuting is a very big source of daily stress, being in a rush, time stress. And, you know, one thing about the pandemic is maybe there's a little bit less of that, which is good for the earth and good for our body. Of course, there's bad news. There is climate crises, pollution, smoke. I live in California, and we have had a month on and off of heat waves and smoke. This is our new future to contend with. Social stress, very important, arguments, conflict. And then there's depression, anxiety and depression, which is a response to too much stress. And then all the time, the clock is ticking. So when we think of time, and when we think, oh, time is money, time is valuable, that actually stresses us out in itself. So how does stress get under the skin? There are many key pathways to how we age here that you can see. And so one is telomere shortening. I have written a book on telomeres. Are different type of DNA. It's not genes, but it's these base pairs that are wrapped up like protective caps, protecting our genes. These telomeres are regulated, very sensitive, very highly regulated. They detect problems or stress in the cell. And if there is something going wrong, if there's tremendous amount of stress in the cell, oxidative stress, inflammation, they will either shut down that cell into a senescent state so that it's just an aged old cell that secretes inflammation, or it might even lead to a programmed death, to apoptosis, when the cell is basically kills itself. So there are ways that telomeres can lead to old cells. As we age, they get shorter and shorter at a slow rate, but we can speed up that rate based on our lifestyle. If we have a lot of toxic stress and we don't have a lot of buffers like exercise. Mitochondria are the energy battery in our cells, and they talk to the telomeres. They are very close friends. They're near each other. And the mitochondria gives off energy, creates energy, but it also creates free radicals or oxidative stress. And when the mitochondria gets old and leaky, then the oxidative stress leaks out more and it wears down the telomeres. And likewise, when the telomeres get too short, they send messages and signals to the mitochondria that damage and impair the mitochondria. So these two are very close systems. And then there's inflammation, which we think of as the major highway of aging. We do not want a lot of inflammation increasing over the years in our blood. And so one common way that we age is that we have a increase in systemic inflammation. That means it's in our blood. That means it's everywhere in our body. And so this again is a very closely related way that we age, like telomeres. When telomeres get too short, the cells become inflamed. They start creating pro-inflammatory cytokines and inflammation. So we now know from years of research that stress is impacting these aging mechanisms. About over 15 years ago, I guess maybe 16 years ago, Elizabeth Blackburn and Julien and colleagues, and with me, we went and examined in a very high stress sample, a sample of mothers caring for children with a chronic condition, we measured their telomeres. We found that the more stress that the mothers feel, they report feeling overwhelmed. The shorter their telomeres, the lower the levels of their anti-aging enzymes, telomerase, and the greater levels of the oxidative stress. It wasn't just about being a caregiver. The good news, it was about how you respond to being a caregiver. So it was those who felt more stress, not those who were caregivers. We also know that, fortunately, that telomeres are associated with all of these healthy behaviors that we can do every day. So getting enough sleep, but also quality of sleep. The feeling that you slept well is associated with longer telomeres. So when we sleep, deep restorative sleep is one of the most healing states. It's when we do a lot of repair, we clean out our brain. And so it turns out this is also very important for telomeres. Relaxing states of meditation or other mind-body activities appear to boost the anti-aging enzymes telomerase. Eating a whole food diet is associated with longer telomeres. This is a very robust pattern that fruits and vegetables are associated with longer telomeres in many, many studies in different countries, including Portugal. Being sedentary, sitting a lot, not moving, is related to shorter telomeres. And exercise is related to longer telomeres. Not too much exercise, but moderate. So this is great news because there are so many ways that we can nudge ourselves toward a healthier day in small ways that will help our telomeres, and thus may also help our mitochondria and our inflammation. So I'd like to ask catastrophic thoughts, very easy to do these days. How much are you relaxing, maybe being social, and how much are you having deep restorative states, if any? Most people don't. But if you have a daily practice of a mind-body exercise, you are probably in a different category of health. Let me show you a model that my colleagues and I have been working on with my colleague, Alexandra Croswell. We've been really thinking about how to measure and understand healthy states of arousal. So there's acute stress. We have too much of that, it's toxic, but little blurps of it, it's very good for us actually, what we call hormetic stress. We have a default baseline, the level of stress we always carry around that makes our nervous system a bit vigilant and constricted. So we're not always relaxed when we're walking down, we carry stress, and maybe it's unconscious, maybe we don't even know it. Then there's rest. We do lots of rest, right? We love recreation, watching movies, TV, socializing, doing hobbies. This is very nice, but it's not the same as a deep rest state, a restorative state, like we have during sleep, like we have during mind-body exercises. And we believe that partly why these activities are so important for cell aging is that they create a more relaxed default baseline, meaning we walk around every day, every minute with less stress, with less autonomic nervous system tension. So this is a model. There's lots of, reasons why we think this is true. So let me go to my last point, which is that, well, we know that relaxation is good and deep relaxation is even better. Hormetic stress is short-term acute stress, high stress, and we think that's actually good as well. So when we live a life, this is from a paper I just published in Aging Research Reviews. And what it suggests is based on a lot of animal research and worms and flies, we know that when there's no stress in someone's life, they're very cautious and not engaged in life. It's not enough stress. We don't think that that leads to optimal aging or health span. We think that leads to shorter life. But then there's an ideal exposure to short-term stress, exercise, and other short-term stressors like psychological challenges that we can manage. And that we think cleans up cells. And then there's the toxic stress. When there's too much stress, it goes on and on and on with no chance to recover. that's when we think we have accelerated faster aging. One study that I'm doing right now is to examine this idea of positive acute stress, positive short-term stress, or hormetic stress, by looking at the Wim Hof method. Wim Hof is also called the Iceman, and many of you may have heard of him, or maybe your children have heard of him. He's very popular among young adults. And the protocol we're testing is 4 cycles of inhalation and breath retention. So it's kind of like a hyperventilation and then a hypoxia, cold exposure, cold showers or ice. And we know from past studies that this may improve the immune system. So we're testing, can we improve and slow cell aging? Can we promote better stress responses? Now in California, and I know that Portugal has had its share of wildfires too, we are living with a new kind of overwhelming stress, uncertainty stress. And I'm going to just point to 3 ways that we might be able to live well with climate crises. It's never going to be the same. We have a baked-in future that is worse for the earth. And so by embracing that and accepting that with grief, we can realize that we have an uncertain future with more climate crises. We must control what we can. There are certain things we can't control, and we must see the opportunities, the positive that can come out of this new world that we're in. This is a picture of the Bay Bridge. We woke up last month to having a day where we felt like we were on Mars, the planet Mars. The sky was orange, the sun was blocked out, and it was a heavy smoke cloud high up that was blocking the sun. And so this is, these are new experiences for us that create this existential stress. And so we're going to need to stretch ourselves to cope in a new way and really create a new future that is saves our biodiversity and changes the way we burn carbon. I lastly want to point to this website that my colleagues and I have spent many months building. It's in English, but you could translate it with Google Translator if you're interested. And I really recommend it for people looking for different coping strategies for stress and mental health issues. So on this, we started because everyone in our medical system and healthcare system was so stressed out with the virus, with the beginning of the pandemic. And so we have a lot of psychological first aid strategies and videos. And now we're dealing with something different. So we have a lot of information on the site of dealing with uncertainty and with climate crises, with this kind of new world mindset. So I hope this is also helpful to you. And I'm going to end my slide sharing there. And hopefully we can have dialogue.
So many interesting conclusions you have there, and thanks for sharing with us. One conclusion I would like to clarify. Is this more a question of social sciences or life sciences, or is it both? Because you talked about our daily habits, but then you talk about telomeres. How is that link between the 2 fields of science?
Well, Vasco, you get right to the point, don't you? I'm going to say that that you cannot put your money on one or the other, that they are one, that they are related. And that is because what we do overrides our biology. So let me give you an example. We may have prediabetes or diabetes. We may take a pill to prevent the insulin's resistance. Metformin, one of the closest things we have to an anti-aging pill. And that may slow the level of insulin excess and slow the path to diabetes and complications. But not if we, with our mind of craving and wanting and stress eating, if we're eating a lot of sugar and carbs, forget it. The metformin barely works. It's not going to protect us. Our behavior overrides our biology in so many ways. So I would like to say that the biological sciences and understanding what's in the cell is very helpful, and understanding how our mind works and communicates with the cell is the connection that we need to keep in mind, the bigger picture. So it's not just going to be a pill that is going to extend our life. It's got to be also the ways that we, lifestyle factors, the ways that we carry our mind and our body.
Okay, Elsa Logarinho, your approach is more from the biological
point of view, even though I must say that I'm quite a big fan of Elissa's work, because I think she's absolutely right. I think we have always this interconnection between nature and nurture. So it's always genes and environment. So genes, of course, give us a certain susceptibility to aging and other diseases. But of course, then the environment makes the whole difference. So you have always these twin studies, so the true twins, that they are exactly the same genetically, but then if they are raised in different environments, they of course get different susceptibilities and different kind of diseases. So what I'm quite fun now in the aging field is that I realize, so I must say I'm not working for so many years as Elissa in the field, but I got very enthusiastic in this field because I noticed that, you know, there used to be actually aging field was not like a real research field. It was like a sum of different research fields. So there were people very interested in the telomeres, there were people in the DNA damage in mitochondria. So all these different kind of biological research questions. And I realized that now it's everything the other way around. So actually people now in the aging field are much more interested in looking at the old formulas that you know from thousands of years for rejuvenation, like, you know, what do you eat, what do you exercise, what do you sleep. How does this impact actually in all those called hallmarks of aging? So the big features that you find in an age cell. And so to say that I honestly believe on the both variants of the equation. So I think they are interconnected and they are both important, because also we know now that even, you know, those things that are not specifically on your genes, so you don't need to have mutations to have an increased risk for aging, but you can have small chemical changes in your DNA which are imposed by the environment, and that actually comes from your embryonic development. And I think Elissa has nice studies showing how, you know, stress pregnancies and stress mothers, they transmit all these into their pups or children. So just to say, I mean, environment is from our very beginning, since we are a single cell, right, Elissa?
Absolutely. So many good points you've brought up. And the twin studies and the pregnancy studies really are remarkable. They tell us so much. So the pregnancy studies show us that the mother's experience, for example, of stress, if she's having acute stress while the baby's developing, the baby comes out with a different level, a different initial setting of the telomeres, a different level of aging right from the beginning of life. And there's certainly genetic transmission of telomeres and epigenetic clocks. That is partly why the mom and the baby maybe look so similar, but there's also a non-genetic component. And we can break that up into two pieces. One is the developmental origins of health hypothesis, that the fetus and fetal environment is creating and shaping the baby to be prepared for a world of stress. And so it's that experience in that biochemical, stressful environment during development that is, for example, probably causing the shorter telomeres, and having the baby come out with some different settings for life. Like the baby comes out maybe smaller at first, but then there's a lot of catch-up growth. So we found that the stress during the pregnancy predicts a bigger trajectory of rapid infant weight gain, even though they come out the same or a bit smaller. Then there's a third way that the transmission of health may occur, and that is at the epigenetics. And so the epigenetic pathway, we usually think of that as, well, the baby's genes are being turned on and off based on the environment it expects in utero. But we now know that even after we're born, our epigenetics can change based on our experiences. And we also know that telomeres are transmitted epigenetically in a way we call it epigenetic-like, which is simply this. If the sperm and the egg have particularly short telomeres, the baby comes out with particularly short telomeres, regardless of the genetics. So it's a direct transmission.
So are we talking about something like contagion?
Transmissible, hereditary.
No, but because stress may be contagious. If you are with your friends, you become happier, perhaps, if they are happy, or the opposite.
You sounds like you know about all of that research. Absolutely, there is amazing research showing these network effects, that if we are surrounded by, that if we are happy, we're more likely to have networks that are happy. And the same with obesity, depression, inflammation. So we are really socially connected to people like us, and that is thought of as contagion, as social contagion. Now, there are also psychological studies that show that in the moment, emotion is contagious. So that is, of course, probably something we forget, but we are shaping others' well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So you told us earlier that telomeres don't just shrink as you get old, as the years pass. It depends also on what you eat. For instance, are there some numbers, some evidences that those who follow a Mediterranean diet live longer than those who use only junk food?
Yes, so there's always the question of, are the telomeres causing the shorter lifespan, or is it the diet is influencing both the telomeres and the lifespan? And telomeres are just a marker, just an epiphenomena, not causal. And so what we do know is that telomeres are both. They are markers and they are mechanisms. They are causal pathways for aging, at least part of aging. We know that because some of us have genes for very short telomeres, or low telomerase that make short telomeres. And those same genes predict greater likelihood of dying from heart disease or from dementia, or developing heart disease or dementia early. And so it's not about what the length is from your lifestyle there, but rather just from day one, if you have short telomere genes, you're more likely to get dementia and heart disease. So we know there's a causal pathway. And of course, then there are people with true genetic disorders with short telomeres, and they die very, very early.
Again, about what you mentioned, the types of stress. You mentioned two types of stress: hormetic stress and toxic stress. Is it something we can talk about, good stress and bad stress?
Yes, this is
we need stress. We need stress to survive.
small amounts.
We do. We want it. We like it. We're evolutionarily evolved for it and prepared for it. And it's the recovery from stress that we are, you know, our biology is so amazing, the way we clean up our cells. So during recovery from stress, for example, there are little scavengers, heat shock proteins, and autophagy, little Pac-Men, that become very activated, and they clean up junk in the cell. So we know that right after acute stress during recovery, these cells look younger instead of older. And when we apply a little bit of stress to an organism, it may live longer, not shorter. So for example, worms who get a little intermittent bouts of stress, you fry up a worm, you heat up the worm, and what you find is you get a long-lived worm. But if you heat up the worm to make it too hot, too long, you get a dead worm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are talking about what we eat, what people we relate with, but you use in your research, Elsa, animal models. How is it?
So, I mean, actually the animal models, I mean, the worms are a perfect model. I don't use it, but many of the aging associated genes actually come from these simple models like the nematodes. But I mean, we can do, for instance, starvation or fasting in our animal models. And actually that shows what Elissa was just talking about. It doesn't matter whether you measure the telomeres or whether you measure DNA damage or the amount of senescence you have in the organism. The fasting, which has become quite popular nowadays, I think at least the society seems more worried and at least aware of it. It definitely improves this condition that the cells have to get rid of the junk they have inside. So this was actually the studies from a Nobel Prize, and it's called the autophagy. So it's a way the cells clean all the junk they accumulate. So it's good actually if you think about, I mean, I don't want to bring religion here, but you know, most of the religions actually have a long period of fasting, and that is the way that people used to think about. You need to clean and purify yourself. So it works, and I think even though I think people need to be more aware about the way the fasting is done, because it's interrelated, for instance, with your circadian rhythm. So you actually, there is one issue. If you could sleep 10 hours a day, which nobody actually does nowadays, but if you could sleep 10 hours a day, you would be fasting 10 hours a day. So the thing is that...
That's what turtles do, for instance?
For instance, I mean, well, yes.
That's why they live hundreds of years.
And maybe, yeah, and well, they have the hibernation thing, which is another issue as well. But yes, I mean, you need to couple, so you should have periods where you are not, you know, you should not be increasing your oxidative stress and your inflammation level. I mean, if you get sick, for instance, you immediately stop eating. And that's because your body is with a very high inflammation level.
The body is rejecting?
It's rejecting food, because food will, of course, increase your inflammatory body state. So, we study, of course, we have been approaching genetic pathways and the way that we can modulate these pathways to improve the cellular fitness overall, and so modulate all these hallmarks that you find in a very aged cell. Of course, genetic approaches, if they remain genetic, you cannot do too much because there is not still a gene therapy that you can use. So, but nevertheless, what we are interested also in our work is to actually see how all these quality of life modulations can actually impact in these pathways. So that is what you should measure. And I mean, you need to, it's maybe, I think I read Elissa's book on the telomere effect. So it's actually, I think everybody, it's mandatory. Everybody should read your book.
Yes, let me tell that there is a Portuguese translation. I think it's called Ciência da Juventude. A Ciência da Juventude.
It's like the youth elixir. It was translated to youth elixir.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and I think it's mandatory to read it because actually Elissa can translate all this scientific knowledge and all the experiments done and validated in animal models and even human case studies. How can you then use a formula that you could try to follow up? I mean, relax, so we cannot all do everything perfectly, but at least to come up with a few decisions in your life that help you to improve your biological age, because that is the other issue. In Portugal, at least, Elissa, our population is one of the oldest populations in the world. I think we are on the top 3. But for instance, comparing with Japan, we realized that the Portuguese are aging still not well, right? So we have lots of comorbidity in our age people. And even though we have the so-called Mediterranean diet. But it's true, I think, with all the globalization issues, we are not following so strictly the Mediterranean diet nowadays. So there are things that it's true, we still do it better here in South Europe, but I think we are losing this tradition of an healthy diet with the generations. So our grandparents were doing nice, and our parents so-and-so, and we are just spoiling everything up nowadays. So, but it's true, we are a very aged population with lots of problems still. Our health system is still with lots of burden in terms of assistance to cardiovascular disease, diabetes. So we want to add life to our extra years. I think that is the goal now, and not just having extra years in our life.
Yeah, exactly. It is, I like to think of it as two different buckets of things that will improve our health for public health. One is if we are surrounded by a toxic food environment, the processed food, the high sugar content, that is clearly a big factor in all of those diseases you mentioned, the diabetes, the heart disease, cancer. And so getting rid of toxic sources of stress, so the diet, the psychological stress, violence, feeling unsafe, when extreme poverty, food insecurity, not knowing if you can make it through the month, those are sources of toxic stress. So removing some of those, and that will take social policies and social networks, and then adding some of these things that promote longevity. So for example, the deep restorative states. It's not just relax, but actually, your body could use some cleaning, some deep restoration besides sleep. So get enough sleep, but also add some mind-body exercises. That's what our biology loves. It loves it. And so that's one thing. And I guess another would be this idea of short positive stress. So everyone knows about exercise. Doesn't have to be endurance exercise, an hour, with long runs. It could be these short bouts. We now know that those are just as good. And what are other ways we can add positive challenges to our life? It's a question. We haven't really been acknowledging the worm studies and the fly studies in how that would relate to humans.
You think these are hormetic stress? That's what then starts not happening so much when you get old, right? So I think societies need to think about improving this level of hormetic stress in the elderly, because our whole population starts getting less stimulated and occupied, so they don't have these small pieces of stress or challenge that actually stimulate and rejuvenate, as you have shown your cells and your body, right? So what do you think, what can the society do better?
Yeah, there's a program I talk about it in the book, that brings retired people back to a job, and it's kind of a hard job. They're mentoring at-risk youth in schools. So a few days a week, they're tutoring. They're going into these schools. Some of them are dangerous and poor. And so what's happening there? They're stressed out. This is not an easy job. They're seeing, families that are in distress, that are poor, children who aren't necessarily having their needs met. But because they're helping, they actually feel this generativity, this meaning and purpose. And the latest study showed that the hippocampus was actually increasing. So when they scanned the brain of these older people who are engaged in their new job, they find that it's actually creating a more youthful state in the brain. Their memory should be improving if their hippocampus is improving. So it's an example of how we shouldn't just assume if you're older, you sit, you disengage, right? It's the opposite of what they should be doing. They're wonderful resources in their wisdom and their ability to be connected and social and helping others. So it's a new model we need to think about. That's called the experience core, CORPS. That's what we call it here. And so that's a model being adopted. So Elsa, I would like to go back to what you said. You are clearly a very broad thinking basic scientist, because you know so much about the role of behavior in modulating biology, and you embrace it. But in general, as you said, most scientists work in silos in a very narrow area and a very narrow pathway. And that's not necessarily, the right way to make big, discoveries about aging. But I am curious to hear what you think about coming up with a pharmaceutical for preventing aging. How realistic is it? How many years away is it? Will it just be one drug? Is it really going to be able to help us even if we're eating, a poor diet?
Doing all the wrong things, you mean?
And let me add something, and I'd like to hear from you both. What about gene editing?
Yeah.
Is this also a path to go through? Because, in parallel with diet and with all that, exercise and so on, what do you think about this?
So, of course, I'm totally in favor of the natural approaches. I think gene editing is still scientific fiction at the moment. So there was all, of course, and now the novel and everything on the CRISPR strategies that, of course, gave us very important tools to work in the genetic field, but still they have lots of complications. You can just not, so there are the side effects, and you can still not do this in a human. So, and then comes the pharmacological interventions. And so, of course, I mean, my lab, we are working in one of those, and we are quite hopeful, at least because we are very interested in a condition that is a genetic disease of premature aging. It's a very rare disease, but there is a foundation actually in the United States, the Progeria Research Foundation. And what happens to these children is that they are born totally normal. They are healthy until they are 1 year old, but then they have a genetic deficiency that impacts the cellular nucleus, which is the place in our cell where we have our genetic material. And so what happens is that because the nucleus is not with integrity, you get lots of DNA damage. And so, I mean, of course, these children need a pharmacological intervention because we cannot do the gene editing yet. And there are ways of at least delaying the premature aging, but still, let's face it out. We can't help getting older. We just don't want to get old so fast, right? So we can delay aging. I think there are many interventions that are helping. Still, I think, for instance, and this extends because I see the telomere erosion as a kind of DNA damage. I think whatever comes from damage in your DNA, it's one of the primary causes that you have in cellular aging, and not necessarily only in cells that are able to divide or proliferate. So actually you can have DNA damage in differentiated cells like your neurons. And so to come out with a strategy that could somehow improve your cells to repair the damage you accumulate during all your years of age, that would be a way. But still, I mean, this is our idea. We are still doing also, I mean, for the moment is still also still an hypothesis, and this is what we are interested about. But we honestly think that, you know, all those things like then when the cells become senescent, it is already an accumulation. So the accumulation of cells that stop dividing is already like the ultimate phenotype that you get from all the macromolecular damage that you accumulating during your years. So, answering Elissa, I think it's good to have some pharmacological interventions to help people that cannot follow all these great quality of life formulas, because I think this still needs a very social, economic intervention. That I would totally agree that if the governments could help us to positively control the way we live and not negatively. So I think we are still pretty much the result of our politics, and I think this affects the whole world. But it would be nice. So I think there are strategies that are being efficient. So even if it is supplements like, you know, vitamins, the omega-3 supplements, so things that if you do, of course, under a control, right? Mm-hmm. So with a doctor recipe, that will certainly help us, right?
Beautiful.
And you, Elissa, what about gene editing?
Well, I mean, I agree with Elsa. We don't know yet. It is a brilliant discovery that we can do this, but we don't know how it is going to apply to normal human aging. I was thrilled that last month the 2 Nobel Prize winners for this discovery were both women.
Yeah.
And celebrate those victories. My colleague who won, Elizabeth Blackburn, who did, one of the discoverers of telomerase, was also a Nobel Prize winner for that.
2009.
So we need more women scientists.
Yes.
I think so. I agree strongly with everything Elsa said. I think that we really need this type of basic research for understanding the basic biology of aging and how we can interfere.
So,
and we, but
by now, we are just in the step of slowing down the agency, not reversing the agency, right? Aging.
Well, the lifestyle will slow it down. The healthy lifestyle will slow aging. Then there are biohacks that are extreme things that we can do that may reverse, that actually do rejuvenation, not restoration. And so Elsa had mentioned caloric restriction and the different patterns that are being tried now, like the fasting mimicking diet, which is a very, very low calorie diet. And in the mice, it's very exciting, the work of Walter Longo, et cetera, which is showing that you can regenerate stem cells and tissue and organs through this type of stress, the short-term stress.
Let me go back to one point you mentioned in your presentation when you were talking about the aging process, and you talked about telomere shortening, mitochondria impairment, and systematic inflammation. Does all these 3 steps are impacted by stress? Or all of them?
Yes, so the mitochondria stress link has been a question mark, and few people have studied that. And with my collaborator at Columbia, Martin Picard, we published a paper recently that showed that caregivers have very low mitochondrial activity. The enzymes are very suppressed. And so if they're feeling fatigue and lack of vitality, that's a very understandable state because the chronic stress is suppressing the activity of their energy battery, right? Their mitochondria. So we do know that stress is certainly related to inflammation, and depression is associated, some types of depression is also associated with these higher levels of inflammation in the blood. These are reversible states.
Okay, we know that anyway, stress is unavoidable in our societies nowadays.
It's unavoidable and very naive, right? In fact, what Elsa was saying about the elderly, that's the example of avoiding stress and staying, disengaging and staying maybe too safe is not healthy either. So we want to really embrace stress and really try to have challenges in our life, psychological challenges that are manageable, and really be, in a way, finding the edge, finding the discomfort so that we can not just grow psychologically and live more deeply, but biologically, we think that is good for ourselves.
But those million people that do daily commuting, for instance, or those 80 million refugees and displaced people, how can they avoid being stressed? It's a big issue, no? How can we deal with it?
I mean, the displaced refugees, I have a colleague who is studying some populations of refugees, at the level of trauma that they have experienced is phenomenal. This is the research of Amit Bernstein. And so that's toxic stress. And that is not something that we would ever seek or wish upon anyone. it does have what we think of as a biological embedding or an imprint on our biology and of course our mental health. What Amit is doing is offering training in mindfulness. And while it is not a solution, many of these refugees are finding that it is medicine for them, that it is incredibly important for them to be able to go on with their life as refugees with some peace when they can foster that and effortfully create it. And so we think of mindfulness as a extra thing for promoting enhanced well-being and longevity, but for people who've experienced trauma, it actually may bring them to a baseline of being able to feel ease and content.
Okay, you both have mentioned already that we are not looking for immortality yet. And okay,
well, many people are, and I don't know, Elsa, what you think about this, but there are large groups of societies and scientists who are trying to live to 150 and think that this extreme longevity is achievable, and they want that for themselves, and that's their goal. So what do you think of that?
Well, what's your take on that?
I'm not a big fan of it, Elissa, to be honest. I think it's too much longevity, and we need to think, of course, if we start replacing some of our organs, right? You could think that you can last until 150, basically. So it's like having an old car and, just replacing every once in a time. So if you get new heart, new kidneys, all that stuff, I mean, okay, you can go until 150. I like very much.
A lot of young people, like the young blood growth factors. That's another big trend here.
Yes. So the parabiosis you are saying, right? So many people believe, that if you can rejuvenate by having this circulation of young blood,
your own blood,
in an old organism. Well, that is much easier alternative indeed. But still, so there is this, I remember this Nature paper from Jan Vicht, New York. So he has shown that actually it's like we have a genetic limit for our longevity, and so the humans, I would say, we can last until 100, 110. And what this study has shown is that actually you have increased your life expectancy in between 50 to 80 years old range, but actually the people that were having 90, 100 years old longevity in all these all over this last century, actually the expectancy didn't change that much. So to come up with the idea that actually what I would like is that we can die just because we are old and not because we have an age-associated chronic disease. And actually, I'm not sure whether actually to die of aging is actually already something that is official. I don't know in the United States, but I heard something that in Europe you can actually die because you are just old, and the machine just so there is not an official disease that you are dying of, and I think that's nice. That's the way we want to live this world, right? So we just stop our machine naturally, but not with all this complicated chronic disease, not with our loss of mental health, with loss of mobility. So I'm not a fan, to be honest, of going until 150, even though I like very much to live. But I think the generations need to be as they are. It's just we need good health until our last moment. That's, of course, then everybody asks, what are we going to die of? Elissa, I don't know.
Sounds good to die peacefully at the end without a lot of suffering is a beautiful vision and goal. And now we have a very different scenario where we spend our, kind of medical institutional complex spends so much money on trying to cure diseases that can't be cured and sustain life that is in the, very low quality, very, very filled with suffering. And so it doesn't make any logical sense. And we just have to be realistic. We have one pie, one earth, and we can't contribute such a burden on it with these medical care interventions that aren't even solutions, really. So that's one thing that all of our medical systems are trying to look at, is how much we are contributing carbon pollution to the climate crisis. But then the other is, really looking at how we treat death. We're so terrified of it, we don't talk about it. And having a, more of a conscious type of aging and death that we are choosing for ourselves, rather than having it be chosen by our medical system.
Okay, talking about immortality leads us to religion. You don't want to talk about religion, but we know religion and science are not always good friends, But some people find in religion, they find the peace and the emotional well-being. And this affects also the aging process. So is it something that can be useful?
What do you think, Vasco?
I'm here to ask questions, not to answer anyway. But I think it can be useful because, last week we had here Naomi Oreskes, and we were talking, and she talked about Pascal, the French philosopher. When when someone asks him about God, the existence of God or not God, and he told, okay, what's the risk of accepting there is God, and what is the risk of not accepting? If we don't accept and he exists, it will be difficult because I will burn in hell. If I believe and he doesn't exist, okay, nothing happens, so it's okay. Okay, we are reaching the end of our session. Elissa, thank you very much for sharing this.
I agree with you. I think that religious affiliation and activity is very, very good for health. It's just that you can't, if you don't have belief, you can't choose it and decide I'm going to be religious because it's healthier, right? But if you have it, it's incredible. And there are so many wisdom traditions that bring rituals and well-being practices that are tried and true. And, as Elsa said, we've learned so much from traditional cultures about what's good for our health. We've lost so much of it, but religion brings some of that back. And so it's the socialization, the spirituality, the feeling connected, all of that is, very much part of a better health span and more purpose in life. Yeah.
Okay, so we are really reaching the end of our session. One final advice: keep happy and carry on. Is it like this?
So you're asking the wrong person, because I'll say stress is inevitable, and it's about being okay with what is.
Yes.
And so when we're happy, noticing it, absorbing it, reliving it, retelling it, it's beautiful, but not grasping onto it and thinking we always need to be happy, because that's just, that is really not how our lives and our reality works. And especially in this kind of climate crisis, chapter ahead of us. And so that's, partly why.
And the pandemic as well.
The pandemic, yes, and the pandemic to me is just one pandemic, and there will be more because of the climate changes. So I really do, I was raised Jewish, and I really have benefited from like more of the Buddhist philosophy that really helps us grasp uncertainty and live well with uncertainty and be present for the joyous times, and really just recognizing that most of the time we are okay and things are as they are, whether we want to change it or not.
Elissa Epel, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Elsa Logarinho, as well.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Estamos a terminar esta sessão. De hoje a uma semana teremos a última sessão do Mês da Ciência e da Educação. Uma sessão com o tema como comunicar ciência ao público em geral. Será uma conferência GPS, Global Portuguese Scientists, com a participação de Ana Godinho, que é diretora de comunicação do CERN, na Suíça, e Pedro Russo, professor de astronomia na Universidade de Leiden, na Holanda. Muito obrigado.